The Miscellaneous Chapters. Gangsang Chu. Gangsang Chu was an attendant of Laozi's who managed to learn some things about the way from the sage. After Laozi departed, Gangsang Chu went north and lived in a remote mountain valley. He kept to himself, but occasionally got help from the local villagers, who were considered stupid and idle. After 3 years of his living there, the villages in the area prospered. The crops multiplied, the livestock was healthy, and there was no crime. The village elders suspected that it was Gangsang's influence, so they proposed to make him a deity and honor him with a shrine. When Gangsang Chu heard about this, he immediately left. His friends thought this behavior strange, but Gangsang Chu said, "When spring comes, plants grow and flowers bud. When autumn comes, fruits ripen and the crops are ready for harvest. How could it be otherwise? The way gets things going without anyone's interference. My staying here will only encourage those petty elders to set up sacrificial altars and make up rituals to complicate people's lives. I do not wish to be the cause of the villagers' misery." Birds fly high to escape hunters. Fish and turtles dive deep to stay away from nets. Similarly, to preserve the body and conserve life energy, we need to know how to hide, not minding other people's affairs and not encouraging them to weave rituals to complicate their lives. Rewarding worthy individuals and parading them around as models will only tempt people to push others to climb the social ladder. Allowing the learned to display knowledge will encourage people to argue for the sake of debating. Ambition does not make people ingenious. On the contrary, it makes them petty and argumentative. When ambitions go unchecked, people will work only for fame and profit. Family members will turn against one another. Ministers will betray their sovereigns. Merchants will cheat their customers. And neighbors will make war with one another. The sage lives in the thick of humanity. She plows the earth for food and takes her leisure in the natural way of things. She does not get involved with petty rights and wrongs, or with profit and loss, and does not partake in the schemes and plots of politics. Unpredictable and unencumbered, she comes leisurely and goes freely. This is the basic principle of life preservation. Like a baby, she acts without knowing and wanders around with no destination in mind. She has no idea of beauty and ugliness or what should be considered good and bad. Because she does not manipulate the fortunes of others, no one can manipulate her. Those who rest in tranquility and clarity will emanate a radiant light. This light, however, is neither dazzling nor blinding. To people, these beings appear as people. To things, they appear as things. When you attain this state of being, others will naturally be drawn to your presence. Without actively commanding, you can rule the world. To truly learn is to learn that which cannot be learned. To practice means practicing that which cannot be practiced. To be discerning means to discern that which cannot be discriminated. To understand means to rest in that which cannot be understood. Nourish your body with the energy of life. Rest in thoughtlessness and give life to your consciousness. Honor your inborn nature and extend this to others. Know that there is a guardian who protects the house where your spirit dwells. If your protector is vigilant, nothing can enter to harm the spirit. Be sincere and honest with yourself, or you will be entrapped by petty concerns. Those who are not open and clear are vulnerable to materialistic attachments. If you have not done anything against your inborn nature, you will never fear that which lurks in the darkness. If you focus on what is within, you will not do good deeds for the sake of reward and recognition. However, if you focus on material rewards, you'll only be concerned with hoarding goods. Those who do good deeds without any wish for wealth and recognition are called possessors of light, because their deeds emanate the light of the spirit within. If you go along with the natural way of things, things will come to you. However, if you try to force your way through, you'll never have enough space for yourself and others. Those who have no room for others will find others threatening. In the end, these people can befriend no one, and no one can befriend them. Alienate yin and yang, and they will become your enemies. It's not that yin and yang will actively harm you. It's your confusion that makes them deadly. People today think that independence is a desirable thing, that yin and yang should be completely separated to each maintain its own identity. They equate independence with separation and encourage people to promote their uniqueness instead of embracing the interdependency of all things. So they go about glorifying their independence, forgetting that all things come from the source and are inherently connected to one another. They claim great discoveries only to realize in the end that they have wiped themselves out chasing illusions. Those who analyze put knowledge on a pedestal. Using the authority of knowledge, they go about assigning right and wrong to every action. They consider themselves the arbiters of correctness, doling out rewards and punishments. They define what is wise and what is ignorant. Those who are considered wise are judged to be worthy. Those who are considered dull are deemed unworthy. Those who are successful are rewarded with fame. Those who fail are heaped with shame. This is what happens when analyzers dominate. The most perfect ritual does not discriminate. If you step on a stranger's foot, you apologize. If you step on your brother's foot, you apologize even though you know he does not mind. If you step on your parent's foot, you apologize even though you know in your heart that you are forgiven. Those with perfect knowledge do not scheme. Those with perfect benevolence show no outward affection, and those with perfect trust have absolute faith in the other. Wipe out delusions generated by will. Undo attachments that bind your heart. Dissolve conceptual notions of what is virtuous and what is not, and you will clear obstacles to the way. Renown, recognition, fame, authority, wealth, and profit are the 6 delusions of the will. Appearance, pedigree, facial complexion, handsomeness, charisma, and pride in the body are the 6 attachments that bind the heart. Repulsion, desire, elation, anger, grief, and happiness are the 6 snares of virtue. Rejecting, accepting, taking, giving, having know-how, and practicing tricks are the 6 obstacles to the way. When these groups of 6 pitfalls no longer dwell within, you will naturally be virtuous. When you are virtuous, you will no longer be bullied by attachments. When attachments no longer rule you, you will be still. When you are still, your spirit will be bright. When your spirit is luminous, this is called enlightenment. If you wish to be still, you must calm your energy. If you wish to nourish the spirit, you must still your thoughts. If you want your actions to have an effect, you must go along with the most appropriate thing to do. This is the way of the sage. Virtue models itself after the way, and life is the light of virtue. Inborn nature, of goodness, is the substance of life. When inborn nature moves, it is called right action. When it is still, it is called virtue. Action that is forced is called artificial action. An act that is done because it is the appropriate thing to do is virtue in action. Understanding that aims to analyze sees only schemes and plots. Understanding that aims only to understand is like a child's innocent wonder. Action and understanding that are not centered on self are called good order. This comes from being skilled in managing the affairs of humanity. All things come from the source and return to the source. The source has no form, yet it is the origin of all things. It transforms itself in time, yet it has no beginning and no end. There is a coming and a going, but there is no one setting these processes in motion. To enter the mysterious source is to step into the void. It is in this deep, dark place that the sage hides. The understanding of the ancient ones went a long way. Some saw that things have never existed and that all forms of existence are inherently empty. Some went farther and saw things exist as they are. Life and death are part of the natural way of things. When life emerges, we burst from the source. When death occurs, we quietly return to the source. Then there are those who have gone the farthest. They dwelled in the void, seeing the vastness as the head, life as the body, and death as the rump. How can the 3 be separated when they are all part of the same entity? I would sincerely love to call these people my friends. Xu Wugui. Xu Wugui was an eccentric who was introduced by his friends to the Marquis of Wei, early 4th century BCE. When the Marquis saw that Xu was dressed simply in the garb of a mountain recluse, he said, "You are known to be wise and learned. It's a pity you have to live a life of hardship in the mountains. Serve me, and I will give you all the comforts you'll ever want in life." Shu Wu Gui replied, "I am the one who should be comforting you. If you try too hard to fulfill your desires, you'll harm your inborn nature. However, if you force yourself to stay away from them, you will harm your senses. Either way, you lose." Once the Yellow Emperor met a young horse herder who was reputed to be an immortal and asked for advice on how to govern a nation. The boy replied, "I've never governed an empire. All I do is herd horses. I suppose governing a country is like caring for horses. Get rid of whatever is harmful to the horses, and they'll be healthy and contented." The Yellow Emperor bowed low and retired. Scholars are not content if they do not spin ideas and thoughts. Debaters are not content if there is no argument and rhetoric. Examiners are not content if they cannot interrogate and intimidate. Trapped by the boundaries they've built, these people will never be exposed to the vast view. Those who want to win a high place in government will strive to bring attention to their achievements. Those who want to be praised for their skills and abilities will work hard at their duties at the cost of health and family. Those who want to appear brave will be willing to put their lives at risk on the battlefield. Shabby artists want to display poverty to show that they are true to their art. Legislators crave more laws. Those who champion benevolence want to do away with bureaucracy. Farmers are not content to plow. They actually welcome weeds so that they can get rid of them. Merchants are not content to offer their goods at decent prices. They actually welcome haggling. Artisans are not content to create practical artifacts. They like to include useless features in their products. Greedy people can never be satisfied, because if they were, they would not have a chance to worry about what they can't get and what they would lose. Ambitious people feel threatened if there are no more challenges. The military feels uncomfortable if there are no wars. Those in power are afraid of peace and prosperity because it means they can no longer control the public by promising peace and prosperity. All these people drive their minds and bodies day after day. What they get in the end is a sickly body and a tired mind. Drowned in the muck and mire they've created for themselves, they end their lives forever disconnected from the way. There are three groups of people who are at risk of losing body and mind: those who are smug, those who are loaded with burdens, and those who don't want to commit to anything. The smug are those who have learned the words of a teacher and can't wait to teach it. Pleased with a morsel of knowledge, they think their learning is vast, not realizing that they haven't even started to learn. Those who are burdened push beyond the limits of body and mind. They return home every day wiped out, not knowing how to replenish their life energy. Their senses are dim, their minds are confused, and their bodies are weak and ill. Those who are afraid to commit to anything don't know what's going on and don't know what to do with their lives. They find a place plagued with vermin with no water supply and call it paradise. They work in conditions where they could be promoted one day and fired the next and call it a dream job. Their advancement in the world is unpredictable, and their retirement yields no rest. One who shares virtues with others is called a sage. One who serves others with one's abilities is called a worthy individual. If you use your skills to win praise and power over others, you will never have their loyalty. If you humble yourself, however, you will never lack support. The sage embraces heaven and earth. He does not need to hold a title or be appointed into a position to help. To those in need, he shares his fortune. To those in suffering, he offers compassion. In life, he works without fanfare. In death, he leaves no trace. The sage does what comes naturally to him, which is to apply virtue. In this way, he is no different from a dog that excels in guarding a house and barking at intruders, or a cat that excels in catching mice that raid pantries. The sage pays no attention to what the crowd is doing. She neither seeks their approval nor distances herself from them. Embracing virtue, she finds harmony, pats her tummy, and rambles around freely. Use the eyes to select what you see, use the ears to choose what you should hear, and use the mind to restore clarity to the mind. The ancient ones used the principles of the way to guide humanity. They never used the ways of humanity to direct the way. Those who are truly great do not think about doing something great. Those who are virtuous do not think about being virtuous. Heaven and earth are great. but they do not brag about their greatness. Those who understand what it means to possess greatness do not seek it, reject it, or change their ways to please the few who always complain. Resting in the greatness of heaven and earth rather than themselves, they embrace that which is inexhaustible and imperishable. This is what is meant by possessing great clarity. When we walk, the foot treads on only a small part of the earth, but it is the untrod vastness of the ground that keeps us moving. Our understanding may be small, but if it is grounded in the vastness of the limitless, it is enough to keep us on the path of the way. To understand the limitless, we need to understand the great unity, the great yin, the great vision, the great equality, the great method, and the great simplicity. Penetrate the limitless with the great unity, untangle it with the great yin, practice it with the great method, embody it with the great vision, hold it with the great simplicity, and end it with the way. Follow that which is luminous, hide in that which is dark and dim, and return to that which is simple and unadorned. Zhe Yang. Zhe Yang was an itinerant scholar who wanted a post in the court of the Lord of Chu, a feudal state in the Zhou dynasty. After several unsuccessful attempts in getting an interview, Zhe Yang finally approached his friend, Wang Guo, who was reputed to have some influence with the Lord's inner circle. However, Wang Guo believed that another man, Kang Yushui, would be more effective in arranging for Zhe Yang to meet the Lord. When Zhe Yang asked his friend what manner of man Kang Yushui was, Wang Guo replied, "He fishes by the river in summer, gathers berries in the forests in spring, and wanders around as his heart wishes. In hardship, he's the kind of man who can make his family content. In affluence, he can make them not brag about their wealth. While he can make kings forget about their power, his presence is enough to inspire and guide them. This is because his approach to life is to move along with things rather than against them. In this way, he effortlessly instills unity and harmony in others. Don't you think Kang Yushui would be better than I in persuading the Lord to give you an audience?" Zhe Yang finally understood Wang Guo's advice and asked no more about meeting the Lord. The sage transcends confusion and complications. Merged with all things, he knows no beginning and no end, no season and no time of day. The common person wants to ask everyone about everything from beginning to end and ends up blindly following the so-called teachers. The sage, however, has not even considered that there is a beginning or an end. He simply moves through the world effortlessly, at one with age and time, never rushing and never stopping. For him, there are no thoughts of failure or success, no notion of completion and achievement. No wonder others can't figure him out or keep up with him. People today don't know how to care for their bodies and their minds. Their attitudes and behavior are no different from those of border guards who bully travelers because it's the only way the guards can feel important and powerful. People turn their backs on virtue, ignore their inborn nature, and destroy the dignity of others. Slipshod in relating to virtue, they are easily trapped by desire and power. When small favors and gains appear, they hang on to them and lose sight of the good of all. In time, they stifle themselves, becoming burdened by life instead of delighting in it. This is no way to live. The wise ruler is quick to attribute success to others and considers with great care if someone is to be blamed for failure. Today, many people in positions of power are quick to praise themselves and slow to thank others for their efforts. They complicate things, and when things don't work out, they blame others and never themselves. They burden subordinates with responsibilities and punish them for not being able to fulfill them. They make small matters large, make easy projects difficult, and penalize people who cannot complete their assignments. They make learning difficult, and then laugh at those who are struggling. They are never the first to complete a journey, but they are the first to ridicule those who do not finish. How can these kinds of leaders not exhaust a country's resources and put fear into people's hearts? It is said that a lack of virtue leads to arrogance and delusion. A lack of courage leads to closed-mindedness. A lack of strength leads to reliance on gadgets. A lack of knowledge leads to deceit. And a lack of contentment leads to theft. When things enter your consciousness, there should be a host to receive them, but never to cling to them. When thoughts emerge from consciousness, they should be guided, but not constrained. Day and night follow each other. The seasons run their course. This is not because someone forces them to behave in this way. It's because it is part of the natural way of things. So it is with ruling a country. The leader of a nation is not partial to any of the departments or ministries and never seeks to control them. The departments do what is naturally their responsibility and are not subject to the whims of those in power. In this way, the functioning of the state will be well ordered. In this way, virtue is complete. The myriad things of the world differ from one another in function, but the way does not favor one over the other or try to control them. If a ruler does not favor one minister or one subject over another, people will be content to be nameless. Being nameless, they can rest in non-action. Resting in non-action, they are effortless in everything they do and do not do. Being effortless, they can wander freely in the vastness of the void. The way is neither a being nor a non-being. We give it a name temporarily because that gives us a convenient way to talk about it. If you talk about it in conjunction with virtue, what you say will be relevant to the way. If you talk about it with disregard to virtue, what you say will be words without much meaning. Neither words nor silence can do full justice to the teachings of the way. To not think about it or talk about it, or even consider being silent about it, is the highest form of discourse. External things. Rub 2 pieces of wood against each other and you will spark a flame. Place metal into a fire and it will melt. When yin and yang are unbalanced, sky and earth will go awry. In the same manner, when happiness and sadness run amok in our lives, we will become anxious and fearful. Our minds will be dangling in suspension between success and failure, acceptance and rejection. Gain and loss rubbing against each other can only generate fires that burn up inner peace and harmony. This is what happens when external things take control of us. If you are able to wander aimlessly, how can anything keep you from being bogged down? However, if you are unable to let go, how can you even begin to think of being free? A mind that is tied down by conformity, a will that is bent toward aloofness, and an attitude that is anchored by an unwillingness to change are all incompatible with wisdom and virtue. A penetrating eye sees clearly, a penetrating ear hears clearly, a penetrating nose smells clearly, a penetrating mouth tastes clearly, a penetrating consciousness perceives clearly, and a penetrating wisdom understands virtue clearly. The ability to penetrate is nothing more than not allowing the senses and the mind to be choked by external things. When we swallow too much food, we choke. When we take in too much sight, sound, smell, or taste, we get confused. When we are bombarded with too many thoughts, we get deluded. Too much stimulation will lead to disorder, and disorder harms not only ourselves but also other living things. All things with consciousness owe their existence to breath. However, if they don't care about this life-giving breath, it is not the fault of heaven and earth. On the contrary, heaven and earth have endowed us with the ability to inhale life-giving breath and expel noxious airs. Nowadays, however, most people choose to block up the passages and close the doors instead. The body is like a building with many levels and rooms. If the levels are organized and the passages between them are unobstructed, we can wander from one room to another without constraint. However, if the rooms are small and the corridors are filled with furniture and junk, we will feel claustrophobic and edgy. So it is with consciousness. If consciousness is a large space, we can wander around aimlessly. If consciousness is narrow and confined, we will never have the chance to wander. With time, we will become comfortable with living in a small mind and be afraid of venturing out to the wide world. If consciousness cannot be given free rein, the breath of life will not flow properly. Consequently, the internal organs will be malnourished, the senses will fight one another, and the body will collapse and die. Forests, mountains, rivers, and lakes grow to be majestic without aiming to please. Trees grow tall and flowers bloom without any desire for display. Today, people love to show off their learning and abilities. They teach because they want to show off their knowledge. They clothe their teachings with sensationalism because they want to attract fame and wealth. They help because they want to be recognized, and they give because they want to be praised. Therefore, schemes blossom in times of crisis. knowledge sprouts in times of contention, stubbornness arises from fear of change, and government policies are made to please the mob. If only humanity can return to the way, government policies will then be like spring rain, timely, appropriate, and nourishing. Knowledge and teachings will be like the autumn harvest, abundant, bountiful, and filling, and nourishing the belly of the mind. People will not need to ask the learned ones how to live better lives. The learned ones will not need to get advice from the virtuous ones on how to change society for the good. And the wise ones will not need to ask the worldly ones how to get along with the times. Words that carry authority. What kind of words carry authority? Certainly not those used by parents defending the wrongdoings of their children. No one expects these words to carry weight, because parents will always speak in favor of their children. If a non-related person advocates for those children, that argument will always appear more unbiased. This has nothing to do with whether the parents are truthful. It's because of how the public perceives it to be. These days, it is sad that people value public opinion over virtue. A virtuous judge will deliver justice regardless of whether a defendant is an offspring or a stranger. The words of those who are perceived as wise will carry authority. It is not because these people actually have wise things to say. Rather, it's because whatever they say is expected to be valuable. Old people who have not grasped the way are still ignorant of the way, no matter how much they have experienced life. They may be seniors, but they are just a remnant of the past. True authority is conveyed not because a person speaks loudly, frequently, or claims seniority. Words of wisdom are grounded in virtue. If you are virtuous, you will always speak from virtue, and in doing so, your words will carry authority. The 10,000 things come from the source, although they have different form and function. This is called the Great Equality. The Great Equality is part of the natural way of things. It is not something decided and agreed upon by scholars and debaters. Arguing with logic that things are equal does not make them equal. Manipulating logic to declare that things are not equal does not make them unequal. Promulgating decree that things are equal or unequal does not make them so. When we start thinking too much, our minds become dead. When people strive too hard for public causes, forcing others to believe what they believe, their path in life becomes petty and confused. Heaven and earth have their own cycles of change. To be in harmony with heaven and earth is to follow the way without striving. However, to live in the light of the way is to have no path at all. Giving away the throne. The sagely Emperor Zun, before 2500 BCE, wanted to give away the throne when he saw that his people were prospering and living harmonious and peaceful lives. Deciding that his work was done, he looked for successors to inherit the kingship. This was a man who had an inkling of what it means to follow the way. When Zun approached Zizhou and asked him to take the throne, Zizhou replied that his health was not good and that he needed to take care of his ailments before he could even think about ruling a kingdom. This was a man who valued his life force and would never exchange his health for fortune and power. He was well on his way to understanding the way. Zun next asked Shang Chuan to be his successor. Shang Chuan's answer was, "I wander in the midst of space and time. In winter I dress in furs, in summer in hemp. To exercise my body I plow in spring and harvest in autumn. In winter I rest my body and clear my mind, dining on what I have stored from the autumn harvest. I rise with the dawn and rest with sunset. I wander freely between heaven and earth." With this, Shang Chuan went deep into the mountains and was never seen again. This was a man who had almost embraced the way. Zun then asked his friend, a farmer of Stone Door village, to take the throne. The farmer simply lifted his wife onto his back, took his son by the hand, and, without a word, disappeared to the islands across the sea, never to return. This was a man who had never been separated from the way. The sage respects life and knows what it means to nourish the body and tame her desires. If she is rich and honored, she does not let wealth and power injure her clarity. If she is poor and unknown, she does not let concerns of fortune and fame entangle her body and muddle her mind. Today, people who occupy high offices in government or business are deathly afraid that they will lose their power and fortune. Fixed on profit and loss, fortune and misfortune, they risk their lives to get what they don't have and to keep what they have. They end up with a sick and tired body and a confused and deluded mind. Is this worthwhile? The states of Han and Wei were once fighting over a small piece of territory along their border. The Marquis of Han asked the sage Weizi for advice. Weizi said, "If Wei tells you that the territory can be yours if you cut off your left hand, would you sacrifice your hand for a piece of land?" The Marquis immediately replied, "Of course not. I would not want to lose my hand even for a piece of land." Weizi then said, "You just acknowledged that your hands are more important to you than territory. And if your hands are valuable to you, how much more important is your body? If you value your body, you won't think about endangering life and limb going to war with your neighbor. If everyone weighed in on what is more important to them, their lives or their possessions, we'd be content with what we have and would not go to war." The Marquis replied to Weizi, "Of all the advice I've gotten, yours was the most enlightening." The teachings of the Way lie in preserving and respecting life. When there is energy to spare, it can be used to manage the family and the state. If you use all your time and energy to conquer a country or take over a corporation, you won't be able to care for your life. Yet there are many today who would willingly sacrifice their health and sanity to pursue wealth, fame, and power. Would you willingly exchange a piece of fine jade for a broken shard of pottery? There was a man named Chuan Xian in the state of Lu who lived in a small house with a leaky roof and a broken fence. Yet he sat on a grass mat in a dignified manner and played his lute and sang. When his friend Zhigang, who held a high position in government, visited him, Chuan Xian came out to greet his friend wearing a hemp robe and straw sandals. Zhigang, seeing the sorry state his friend was in, tried to comfort him, but Chuan Xian simply said, "I've heard people say that if you lack wealth, this is called poverty. If you've acquired learning but cannot put your knowledge to use, this is called distress. I may be poor, but I am not in distress. To pursue ambition by joining political parties, to study in order to show off learning, to teach in order to please your pride, to flatter in order to be promoted, and to abandon virtue to please the mob, I could not do these things. And that's why I may be poor, but I am not in distress." Zhigang was a student of Confucius. Although he held a high position in government, he had never been able to put what he had learned from his teacher into practice. Moreover, to preserve his position, he had to join cliques, flatter his superiors, and take part in court activities that were all show and no substance. Hearing his friend's comment, Zhigang backed away, embarrassed, knowing that he could not part with his political career and social recognition. He might have been wealthier and more renowned, but he was also more distressed. Another student of Confucius, Senzi, lived in a wooden hut and farmed a nearby field. He wore a robe of hemp in summer and a coat of patched quilt in winter. He grew and harvested what he needed and never cut wood to light a fire. His hands were calloused from pulling weeds and planting grain, and his feet were hard from walking barefoot. Yet he would sing the old songs, greet the morning with joy, and go to bed without a care. The emperor offered him a position as a cabinet minister, but Senzi refused. The feudal lords sent him gifts, but he returned them. Those who cultivate the spirit forget about profit and loss. Those who nourish the body forget about fame and recognition, and those who walk the way forget about the mind. Yanzi was one of the most brilliant students of Confucius. Coming from a poor family, Yanzi was often persuaded by others, including Confucius himself, to seek employment in the civil service. Once, when Confucius again encouraged Yanzi to offer his services to the country, Yanzi said, "I have enough land near my home to farm for food and grow hemp for clothing. In my spare time I study and play the lute. I am very happy and contented, and have no desire to join the civil service." Confucius's face was suddenly serious. In a soft and respectful voice, he said to his student, "You know contentment. Those who know what is enough will not be entangled by thoughts of gain. Those who understand how to find satisfaction will not be afraid of loss, and those who cultivate what is within will never lose what is theirs. Even though they do not hold a political seat or become famous, they are not ashamed of their chosen lifestyle. I have tried to teach these principles to my students for a long time. You are the only one who not only understood, but also practiced them." Sages who embrace the way are happy if they are shut in and happy if they can go out. It's not being shut in or being able to go out that makes them joyful. It's because in embracing the way, they see that being blocked or being let through is as natural as day and night, heat and cold, wind and rain. This is why some sages find enjoyment on top of a mountain, and others find contentment in a deep valley. Some are happy to mingle with others, and others find satisfaction living as hermits. The Bandit Chi. There once was a notorious bandit named Chi who commanded a fierce band of followers. Handsome, daring, and shameless, he had what many desired: fame, fortune, and power. Today, people would say that to have good looks, wealth, and a commanding personality is the highest achievement in life. To be learned in many subjects and have the eloquence to talk about them would be the next highest achievement. To be brave, fierce, and determined, and have a band of loyal followers at your side would be the lowest level of achievement. Many would also say that someone who has all these achievements must be a person of virtue. If this were the case, we would consider the bandit Chi to be a virtuous man, since he was successful in everything he did. However, Chi got his wealth by robbing, stealing, and killing. He used his charisma to cheat, and his good looks to obtain sexual favors. Moreover, he commanded his followers through fear and intimidation. Knowing this, would you consider Chi a virtuous man? These days you can get rich if you are shameless, and you'll be trusted if you are famous. Your price, however, would be constant anxiety over how to present yourself to society and whether you could manipulate others. Having sleepless nights, worrying, being tired in body and mind. Is this how you want to live? On the contrary, if you abandon reputation and gain, you will never have to think about being famous and shameless. Not tethered to profit and gain, renown and recognition, you will be able to embrace the way and return to simplicity. Isn't this a better way to live? The petty person will die for riches. The lofty person will die for reputation. Most people will consider the lofty person superior to the petty person. But these two are not that different. They both will not think twice about throwing their lives away for something external. So it is said, don't be a petty person, don't be a lofty person. Return to your inborn nature, preserve your life, and follow the way. Don't try to perfect your benevolence. Don't risk your life for riches, and don't race after fame and reputation. If you need to make an effort to be benevolent, you are no longer benevolent. If you risk your life for wealth, you may get rich, but you'll forfeit your health and sanity. If you race after fame and reputation, you will forever be afraid of losing them. Anxiety over grief and sorrow, and yearning for bliss and eternal joy bring no ease to the body. Fear and terror, elation and excitement bring no clarity to the mind. In times of trouble and disorder, would you remove yourself from the common lot, believing you are superior to the times, and watch the world go by your doorstep? Or would you mingle with the lowly and change as the world changes around you, believing that this is the best way to survive? Both ways are likely to ensure that you'll live a long life and not get into trouble. But you are far from the mark of being a follower of the way. When the wise ones decide to do something, it's always for the benefit of all. When there is enough, they do not try to get more. Having no reason to have more than what is necessary, they stop and retire into oblivion. If there is not enough, they will do whatever they can to make sure everyone has enough. If there is a surplus, they will give it away. Even if they gave away an empire, they would never consider themselves high-minded or altruistic. Greed and high-mindedness have nothing to do with setting the standard of ruling. In fact, they are a violation of the standard. Rulers can command the power of leadership and yet not abuse this power. They can possess all the wealth of the kingdom yet not display their riches to mock and intimidate those who are destitute. When they take action, they calculate the risks and consider whether their behavior would harm others and injure their inborn nature. They may act or refrain from acting, but it is never for the sake of reputation or praise. The world may praise them, but they do not strive to do anything to gain the praises. Contentment brings fortune, and excess brings harm. This is especially so with wealth. When you have a lot, you'll be likely to desire more. The ears will crave rich sounds, the mouth will crave the delicate flavors of meat and wine, and the body will crave sexual arousal and pleasure. This is called disorder. If you are drowned by uncontrollable passion, your life essence will be drained and your body will feel like a mule carrying heavy loads uphill. This is called suffering. If you are greedy for riches, you'll work yourself to exhaustion. As a result, your body will be tired to the bone and your mind will be addled and confused. At work, you will be lethargic, and at home you will sink into languor. This is called disease. If you search endlessly for wealth, you'll end up cramming your rooms with things you hoard but never use. Your house will be overflowing with objects, and your mind will be overflowing with thoughts, yet you will still desire more. This is called shame. If you don't know the difference between wants and needs, you will worry that you'll never have enough. This is called anxiety. If you are deathly afraid that your possessions will be stolen, you will install iron bars and padlocks in your home and refuse to travel without bodyguards. This is called terror. Disorder, suffering, disease, shame, anxiety, and terror are the greatest weapons of destruction. In the end, those who go after reputation will find it elusive. Those who seek gain and profit will find them impermanent. To trap the mind and tire the body in an endless pursuit of these things is called delusion. A Discourse on Swords. The king of the state of Wei was fascinated by swords and swordsmanship. He spent a lot of time testing and collecting swords from the finest smiths in his kingdom. As a result, he had little time to attend to the affairs of his country. The crown prince, concerned for the welfare of the citizens, wanted to find someone to persuade his father to devote time to governing the country rather than indulging in his hobby of swordsmanship. One of his ministers advised that Jiangzi might be a good candidate for this task. Jiangzi accepted the prince's request and appeared before the king in the garb of a swordsman. Expecting a master smith and an expert swordsman, the first thing the king said to Jiangzi was, "What kind of swords do you make, and what expertise do you command in swordsmanship?" Jiangzi replied, "I make swords of all kinds. My workmanship is impeccable, and my skill has no rival. My blade displays the quality of emptiness. When drawn from the scabbard, it transcends fear and doubt. As for my skill, my sword will pierce my opponent first before he can touch me." The king was very impressed and arranged for Jiangzi to meet his best swordsman. When Jiangzi arrived at the tournament ground, the king said, "First, tell me about the swords you plan to use." Jiangzi replied, "I have brought 3 swords, the sword of the sovereign, the sword of the feudal lord, and the sword of the commoner. The sword of the sovereign is held in the scabbard of the 4 seasons. The 5 elements guide it, and the demands of honor and integrity direct it. Thrust it, and nothing can stand before it. Lift it high, and there is nothing above. Stab down with it, and nothing can block it. Swing it, and nothing can hinder it. Above, it can cut through clouds. Below, it can penetrate the deepest parts of earth. When you wield this sword, feudal lords will obey and respect you. Rebellions will be quelled without conflict, corruption will disappear, and the kingdom will enjoy peace, harmony, and prosperity." The king was dumbfounded. After a brief silence, he asked about the sword of the feudal lord. Jiangzi said, "The sword of the feudal lord has wise and brave people as its point. Its blade consists of those who are pure of heart. People of trust and worth make up the spine. People of loyalty and dedication make up the sword guard. Heroes and fearless people make up the hilt. It too cuts without opposition from above, below, left, and right. This is because this sword is modeled after the roundness of heaven and the squareness of earth. When you slash with this sword, its arc follows the path of the sun, the moon, and the stars. When you stab with this sword, it follows the path of the 4 seasons. When it is used to command, it brings harmony and peace to the people. When the sword cuts, it is like the crash of lightning and thunder. Corruption, pride, greed, and anger all melt away. Leaving fear, dread, doubt, arrogance, and pride dead in their paths, this sword will make all bow down and submit to virtue." Finally, after much thought, the king said, "What about the sword of the commoner?" Jiangzi replied, The sword of the commoner is used by those with unkempt appearance, who swagger around looking fierce and aggressive. They slash each other to please the whims of the crowd. Above, it severs heads and necks. Below, it opens livers and lungs. When swung, it always draws blood. It has only one goal, and this is to cause maximal harm and injury. Those who wield this sword are no different from stray dogs fighting over territory. They have no place in the government of a kingdom. Jiangzi then bowed before the king and said, "May I be bold to say that your majesty has been using the sword of the commoner when you should be using the sword of the king. The discourse on swords is over, so I will now take my leave." With that, Jiangzi left the palace and was never found again. After this incident, the king of Wei locked himself in his palace for 3 months to ponder Jiangzi's discourse on the swords. When he emerged from the palace, he held in his hand the sword of the sovereign. His rough and undisciplined band of swordsmen had either left the country or committed suicide. The tournament hall and the training grounds were abandoned, the forges were cold, and no more weapons of destruction adorned the halls of the palace. Needless to say, the crown prince was very happy to see his father be a true sovereign again. The Old Fisherman. Once, some students of Confucius met an old fisherman who asked what kind of work Confucius did and what manner of man he was. The students replied that Confucius taught people to practice benevolence, bring order to society through rites, rituals, and music, promote education for all classes of people, and live together in peace and harmony. The old fisherman merely nodded, then asked if Confucius owned an estate, ruled a fief, or held a position in government. When the students replied that their teacher never aspired to such ambitions, the old fisherman said, "Your teacher is definitely benevolent, but I am afraid he will still be unable to live out his years in peace. To tire body and mind in order to get people to follow rules and convention, to confine the natural ways within the boundaries of education, and to impose peace and harmony by leading citizens like a shepherd herding sheep. This is a vast distance from the way." When the old fisherman's words were reported to Confucius, the teacher exclaimed, "This man is a sage. I must visit him to learn more." Confucius arrived at the old fisherman's hut, stood outside, announced himself, and said, "Honorable one, I have been enlightened by your remarks. Please advise me so I can benefit from your wisdom." The old fisherman replied, "You are indeed humble and fond of learning. I, however, have nothing profound to teach. All I can say is the obvious. Since the beginning of time, creatures who follow the way thrive. Those who oppose the way don't last long. Those whose duties are to mind the affairs of the state should mind the affairs of the state. Those who are not appointed to do so should leave it to those who are. Making sure that there are enough taxes to repair roads, dams, irrigation ditches, that there is a system of just rewards and punishments, that corruption and favoritism are absent from the civil service, and that people with the right abilities are given the right tasks. These are the concerns of the high ministers," the old fisherman continued, "making sure that your inner circle of advisers are loyal and benevolent, that your guards and soldiers are brave and skilled, and that you have collected enough taxes to make the annual tribute to the emperor. These are the concerns of feudal lords. Balancing yin and yang and making sure that the seasons are timely, that the rites and rituals are performed correctly, that the clans and feudal lords are harmonious, that the imperial silos are well stocked, and that the neighboring countries do not invade you. These are the concerns of sovereigns. Now you are not a feudal lord, a minister, or a sovereign. Why tire your body and mind by worrying over all these things? Do you know that there are 8 pitfalls in life?" he asked. "They are the following: doing what you are not meant to do, rushing forward to do something recklessly, attributing qualities to those who are unworthy of them, speaking without regard to what is right or wrong, delighting in faulting others, breaking up friendships and relationships, using speech to slander or cause injury, and saying one thing and doing another. There are 4 great obstacles to virtue. These are plunging into great projects hoping to gain merit and fame, insisting that you know more than everybody else, seeing errors but refusing to change your ways, and favoring people who praise you but refusing to see goodness in those who disagree with you." Confucius sighed and said, "Once I was honored in the state of Lu and held a position in the government. but treachery within the court caused me to be exiled and cursed. As far as I know, I tried to avoid the intrigues and plots, yet I was still a victim of them. How can I escape from something that is beyond my control?" The old fisherman said, "The moment you set your foot in the political arena, you'll be entangled in the politics. You, who tried to teach benevolence, should know that. If you had held on to the truth and had handed political matters to those who were meant to deal with political affairs, you would not have fallen victim to political entanglements." Confucius felt ashamed and asked humbly, "Honored sir, please tell me, what do you mean by truth?" The old fisherman said, "Truth is purity and sincerity at their highest. Those who lack purity and sincerity will not be able to persuade others. Those who show tears but feel no sadness will never experience true grief and compassion. Those who raise their voice and pretend to sound authoritative will never command respect. Those who force themselves to smile but never feel affection will never create solidarity. True authority need not be accompanied by a loud voice. True sadness and compassion are not necessarily accompanied by tears, and true harmony is not dependent on a smile. When you embrace truth within, your spirit will move among things externally and internally. When truth manifests itself in the family, it is loving care and gratitude. In service to a leader, it manifests as loyalty and integrity. In celebration, it manifests as joy and spontaneity. In mourning, it manifests as grief. We can say that truth is that which is the most important part of any experience. Thus, the most important thing in service is loyalty and integrity. In celebration, the most important thing is joy and abandon. In mourning, it is grief. In relating to family, it is loving care. Seek truth in the activity you are engaging in. Otherwise, you'll get bogged down with petty details. Therefore, in caring for family, you should not be picky about where the money comes from, as long as it is through ethical means. At festive occasions, it is more important to ensure that everyone is having a good time, rather than worrying about where to get cups and dishes. When you grieve, the important thing is to feel the loss, rather than squabbling over what exact funeral rite should be used. The sage models himself after the way, values truth, and is not constrained by the petty and the vulgar. He added, "The ignorant person ignores the wider view of things and gets caught up with small concerns. Plodding along with everyone else, he prefers the mentality of the mob and never gets a glimpse of the limitless." Confucius stood, bowed twice before the old fisherman, and left with his students. On the road, one of his devoted students, Zilu, asked his teacher, "Sir, you are honored among teachers. Many bow to you in respect, but we see you bowing before this rough and uneducated fisherman. Why should you give this old guy such respect?" Confucius replied, "Zilu, have you not learned anything from the old fisherman's words? To meet someone wiser than you and fail to show respect violates etiquette. To be able to listen to the teachings of someone whose thoughts are loftier than yours and fail to show honor is to lack integrity. The old fisherman never told people to bow before him, yet those who have a glimpse of truth will recognize him as a sage and will bow in his presence. Those who don't see this are unfortunate indeed. You, who had the fortune of meeting a sage, threw away teachings that many would give away a fortune to receive. The truth is the way. All things are created from it, all things dissolve into it. To go against it is to go against life, to go with it is to follow the natural order of creation. When you encounter the teaching of the way, you need to respect it. This old fisherman certainly possesses the way. How do I dare not show respect?" Lietzi. Lietzi was a respected teacher, and his house was often crowded with students. Once his teacher, Bayun, visited him and saw the number of shoes left outside the cottage. He turned, and without a word, walked away. Lietzi ran after his teacher and said, "Teacher, you have come a long way for a visit. Please come into my house and teach me." Bayun said, "I won't teach you because you haven't even learned what I taught you last time. I told you that you'll have no trouble getting people to listen to you. Your problem is your inability to let them go. You say what people want to hear, happy that you have pleased them at the end of the day, and hoping they will return the next day. You think you have achieved a lot by getting yourself a crowd of students. But no matter what you say, the clever ones tire themselves out, the anxious ones get more worried, and the petty ones don't stop their scheming. At this rate, it's better if you and your students never meet at all. Then the whole lot of you can wander around leisurely, drifting here and there, floating like an empty boat with the currents, and not be entangled in the plots and schemes of the world." Lietzi took his teacher's advice, dismissed his students, and shut himself in a retreat for 3 years. After that, he neither taught nor traveled. Instead, he stayed at home, cooked, cleaned, and did other chores around the house. In this simplicity, he lived out the rest of his life. In our world today, there are many who think that they alone are right. Eager to argue and debate, they can't wait to pit their wit and cleverness against others. But those who truly possess virtue are not even aware of it, and those who walk in the way are completely oblivious to it. They are only doing what is natural to them. The sage rests when it's appropriate and acts when it is necessary. Many people, however, do the opposite. They rest when they don't need to and push when they really need rest. To know the way is easy. To not dwell on it is hard. The sage considers what is believed to be inevitable, transforms it into the evitable, and therefore does not have to resort to force to solve problems. Nowadays, many consider what is evitable inevitable. Therefore, they rely on force to attain results. Those who see violence as a means will always fight to make things go their way. Those who refrain from violence will allow the natural way to run its course. The former ties the knots tighter. The latter allows the knots to disentangle themselves. But the best way is to not let the knots form in the first place. The petty and greedy person sees only gifts, calling cards, and advantages. He wastes energy on shallow and trivial things, but outwardly tells everyone he wants to save the world. His desire for little favors will only bring him punishments as he exploits tax loopholes, creates false documents, and schemes to cheat government, colleagues, friends, and even family. The external punishments of prison and fines will bear down on him, but it is the internal punishments of offending yin and yang, tiring body and mind, that will eat him up alive. Confucius once said that the human mind is more dangerous than high mountains and fast rivers and is harder to understand than the ways of heaven and earth. Whereas heaven and earth follow cycles of growth and renewal, the mind is volatile and sneaky. The seasons do not lie. In spring the flowers bud, in autumn the leaves fall. However, humans may display benevolence and kindness, but harbor bad intentions. In public they may appear firm and trustworthy, but privately they are lazy and dishonest. They may look like they are organized and decisive, but actually be fickle and scatterbrained. The crowd flocks to people who speak eloquently about promises, admiring their charm and drinking in their sweet talk, only later to be burned by deceit and lies. It is for these reasons that enlightened leaders will send a subordinate on a distant mission to test loyalty and give another a position close at hand to test respect. They will give a difficult task in order to observe how well a subordinate sticks to it. They will give financial responsibilities and observe how honestly a subordinate deals with wealth. They will try to get subordinates drunk and watch how they handle themselves. They will put them in the company of sophisticated people to see how well they can hold their own. By applying these tests, a wise leader can determine whether a candidate is worthy of a position in business or in government. If you think that you have embraced virtue, you will always consider yourself to be right and denigrate those who hold different opinions. There are certain qualities that will get you into trouble if you display them. First, being perceived as fortunate, having good looks, wealth, and influence will make you the target of those who are failures. Second, being perceived as wise and knowledgeable will make you the target of those who are ignorant and closed-minded. Third, being perceived as brave and decisive will make you the target of those who are cowardly and fearful. Finally, being perceived as benevolent, kind, and considerate will make you the target of those who are petty and mean. Thus, the enlightened ones never displayed their wealth, fortune, knowledge, wisdom, bravery, and benevolence. Since their actions naturally follow their inborn nature, virtue is already embedded in their actions. Is there any reason to display your virtue to convince the world you are virtuous? Under heaven. In ancient times, people lived according to the way. Where does the way come from? I say it is nowhere and everywhere. Where does enlightenment come from? I say that it does not need to come from anywhere, because it is always there to begin with. Where do virtues come from? The sages give birth to them. The enlightened leader completes them. Those who do not abandon the way are called realized beings. Those who abide in purity are called the virtuous ones. The way is the source of being, virtue is the root of being, and enlightenment is the gate of action. Those who are at one with both transformation and constancy are called sages. Those who use benevolence for inspiration, who let integrity guide their actions, and who incorporate music and ritual into their everyday lives are honorable men and women. The ruler who uses the principles of enlightened leadership to establish laws and regulations, to make decisions and plan actions, and to assign appropriate people to the right tasks are vigilant in repairing roads, dams, and irrigation ditches. They give food and shelter to the needy, make sure that the citizens are nourished and cared for, and are the enlightened leaders of humanity. Sages, honorable men and women, and enlightened rulers all have this in common. They see themselves as the caretakers of the earth and its inhabitants. They bring harmony to the nations, and they extend their bounty and fortunes to all. Today, people do not understand that realizing the sage within is the foundation of leadership. They don't see that the enlightened leader in public is the manifestation of the sage within. Confused and deluded, they choose to abandon the way. Petty and arrogant, they follow their desires, make their own rules, and impose their beliefs on others. If they are wealthy, instead of valuing simplicity, they drown themselves in extravagance. Instead of using virtue as a standard by which to measure their thoughts and actions, they govern their lives by greed and ambition. Instead of aiding others in times of crisis, they criticize those who inspire peace and harmony as weak and cowardly. Preferring force to yielding, they are indeed far from the way. Not to be tempted into using vulgar means for the sake of convenience, not to show off their wealth, not to bring suffering and hardship to others, and not to curry favors from the crowds, but to seek peace and prosperity for the world, to ensure that no one goes hungry and destitute, to know contentment, and to be pure and honest in everything they did. This is what the sages did in propagating the way on earth. To act for the good of all and not be partisan, to be unbiased and just, and not to give in to the whims of the mob and interest groups. This is what the enlightened rulers did in propagating the art of the way in government. Discarding flowery knowledge, doing away with the importance of self, not forcing your will on others, and not meddling with the natural course of things are the principles of the way. Don't be too serious and pedantic, but at the same time, don't be too cavalier. Take out the corners and file down the rough edges so that you can tumble and turn with the 10,000 things. Go beyond acceptance and rejection. Don't get stuck on what came before, and don't be anxious over what will come afterward, but rest in the immediacy of the present. If you don't scheme, you will not invite perils. If you don't look for praise or recognition, you will not tangle with the jealous and the petty. If you rest in stillness, you will never lose clarity and good judgment. A large tree will be knocked down by a storm, a shrub with pretty flowers will be picked clean, and bushes with juicy-looking fruits and berries will be denuded. However, a tree that looks ugly and gnarly will escape loggers. Dull and unattractive flowers will not be plucked, and fruits that look dry and uninteresting will not be harvested. To regard the source as pure, to blend with the coarse and shun the shiny, to regard hoarding as poverty, to live in peace and contentment, and to abide in the radiance of stillness rather than the glamour of the world, these are the arts of the way. For those who practice the arts of the way, gentleness and humility are their outer marks, and respect for all things is their inner essence. When you are not preoccupied with yourself, then things will reveal their true nature to you. Let your movement be as fluid as water, your stillness be like that of a mirror. Lao Tzu said, "Know the male, but never let go of the female. Become the gully and not the ridge. Know purity, but do not abandon practicality. Strive for the valley and not the peak. When others push their way to the front, stay at the rear. When others lag behind, go forward. Where others hoard, embrace that which is empty. Where others tire their bodies and minds for achievement and profit, be easygoing and leisurely. Use profundity as your root and simplicity as your guide. If you are too brittle, you'll be broken. If you are too sharp, you'll be blunted. Always be generous and accommodating. Inflict no pain on others. Keep yourself from being twisted by trends and fashions. Trendy clothes are discarded when they lose their glamour. Fashionable ideas will be replaced when they no longer attract interest. The way, however, stays around because it is timeless. Jiangzi expounded the way in an odd and outrageous manner. But then he himself was an oddball. He expressed the teachings of the way as unadorned, free of bias, fresh and incisive. He was not afraid to be nonpartisan. He never curried favor from the authorities or the crowds. He simply came and went with the pure spirit of heaven and earth. Although his words were sharp and wild, they never caused harm. Strange and unorthodox, his manner of teaching was never arrogant and derogatory. Above, Jiangzi wandered freely in the embrace of the source. Below, he befriended those who knew no beginning and no end. His understanding of the way was broad, expansive, profound, and penetrating. He resonated with change, yet was rooted in the constant. When he spoke, his words were always valid. When silent, he was hidden and arcane. Jiangzi was truly one who embodied the way under heaven.